cannot. Nothing. Now? Yes? Fantastic. Good. It feels really strange talking to the microphone but not hearing the loud voice. But you can hear me okay. That's all right. Thank you very much. Okay. Great. Colleagues, thank you very much. I know it's a relatively early morning event. So today's event titled Catalyzing Sea Change, Bridging Science, Finance and Local Action for Resilient Coastal Communities. This is brought to you by FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, RARE, and AURA, and WorldFish. And in today's event, we have a lineup of excellent speakers with us. And just before we start, I would like to invite Dr. Manuel Barange, Assistant Director General of FAO, to give his, I think it's beyond an opening remark. This is where Manuel is going to share with us the latest, I guess, on climate and fisheries. And that's going to be our departure point for our discussion today. So Manuel, please.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'm just using my headsets to make sure that I am heard. I am heard. So then I can take them off. If I can have the presentation, please. Well, thank you. So I'd like to just introduce to you this report that was released just a couple of months ago by FAO on the impacts of climate change on marine ecosystems. This work represents the work of more than 100 ecosystem modelers around the world. It's a work that has been going on for the last 8 to 9 years, bringing 9 ecosystem models, marine ecosystem models around the world together, making sure they use the same forcing functions, as many of the parameters that have in common as possible in order to compare the results. Now, we do know that marine ecosystems have been affected by climate change. What we don't know is the emissions trajectory that we will follow in the future. So the modeling approaches that I'm going to show results on are based on 2 emissions that open, let's say, an envelope of possibilities. A high emissions scenario, which is equivalent to about 4 degrees warming, atmospheric warming, to a low emission scenario, which is equivalent to 1.5 to 2 degrees warming. And these were the 2 scenarios that we will use. Now, the main question that we want to answer is, how do these futures hold for marine ecosystems? Now, the models that we are using, without going into much detail, are food web models. So start from the bottom using the climate functions and the climate variables, getting into the physics and the chemistry of the ocean, then the primary production, the secondary production, and so on. And in the models, what we use is we estimate the amount of biomass, what we call fishable biomass, which is anything, as you see in there, between 10 grams and 100 kilograms. Anything in the ocean of that individual's mass is what we use as the fishable biomass. So it covers virtually everything that we exploit in the ocean. Now, I'm going to show you, first of all, the first results with four pictures of mid-century by 2050 and by 2100, end of the century, and then low emissions and high emissions. And you can see the 4 slides, the 4 pictures here. Now, 3 messages to remember here. First is that there is a big difference between 2050 and 2100. And there's a big difference between low emissions and high emissions. So by 2050, first, the red colors are decreases in biomass, blue colors increases in biomass, and you can see great patchiness throughout the world. By 2050, whether it is low emissions or high emissions, it's more or less the same picture. It's about a 5% decrease in global biomass under low emissions, 7% under high emissions. When you come to the 2100 figure, under low emissions is a very similar, so it's a stabilization of the decline to about 7% global decline, but under high emissions, it goes up to about a global average of 21% decline in global biomass. So it's a significant decline, and that's the global picture. Now, I'm going to show you a few pictures of region by region, because these models are so detailed that we are allowed to use estimates for every country in the world, and the report provides results for every country in the world. So this is the example for Asia. By mid-century, modest declines, on average 8 to 10%. You can see the patchiness in there. But by the end of the century, under the high emission scenario, then diverges to a decline of about 28% on a global average for that region. Now, if we look at countries inside Asia, you can see here some of the most negatively affected countries. So they are Kuwait and Iraq, perhaps the more extreme levels of loss, more than a 60% drop by the end of the century under high emission scenario. Notable here is China, because of course it's the biggest producer of aquatic foods, a projected loss of 31% under high emissions, but under low emissions a decline of less than 10%. So there's a very significant message here about the difference between high and low emissions that we'll go through in every one of the slides. If we move to the Americas, sort of a mixed projection under the mid-century, with biomass increases in the Arctic in green, as you can see, decreases in red, particularly along the western coast of North and South America. By the end of the century, biomass declining 23% under high emissions, 7% under low emissions. Looking at the countries specifically of the region, of the 10 most negatively affected countries, Ecuador and Peru, the biggest losers. And towards the end of the century, these losses are averted under a low emission scenario again. Then we can move to Europe, also with mixed projections here, with steep end-of-century increases in the Arctic and very deep declines in northeast Atlantic. We can take a look at the most affected countries. Portugal, the one that would suffer the most under these models, particularly with declines in the Azores, as well mitigated through low emission scenarios. There are some areas in this region where losses are completely avoided under low emission scenarios, particularly in the northern Mediterranean, Albania, Greece, Malta. Which is a bit surprising perhaps, but it is a very clear message in these models. Then we move to Africa. We see some moderate declines in exploitable fish biomass by mid-century, particularly offset with some increases, but very concerning end-of-century declines, especially you can look at the deep red patches on the western side of the continent and also part of the Red Sea. If we look at individual countries in the region, the most affected ones, Sudan, Angola, Senegal, all the countries listed here showing concerning levels of declines, and a large fraction of these losses, again, averted by the low emissions scenario in blue. You can see that there's a significant degree of variability from year to year, and this is quite important as well to recognize, because you can get a signal suddenly going up and you think, okay, you are recovering, and not necessarily, and vice versa. So now the final region to show is Oceania, and shows some significant worrying decline levels under high emission scenario by 2100, on average 30% decline for the whole area. But again, this decline is significantly avoided under the low emission scenario. So country level signals very stark declines in places like Papua New Guinea and Tuvalu, with almost 50% decline in biomass in both of them under high emission scenario. And again, under the low emission scenario, the blue lines, you can see significant recoveries or a modest decline. By the way, I should have mentioned that when you see the black lines before each one of these squiggly lines, that black line is the historical record, right? So just summarizing the results in these sort of flower figures, that shows for every country the degree of warming. So the circles, inside circles are 10%, 20%, 30%, either decline or increase. And as you can see on the low emissions, those declines are much more contained than under the high emissions. So I'm going to send you some take-home message, but I want to show you first of all that this is the end of the century low emissions and high emissions maps that you've seen early on, but there's a new one at the bottom, and that's the model agreement. So for the first time ever, actually, we have 9 different models that can be compared. And so you can see that the degree of blue in that bottom figure shows the degree of agreement between models. And this has never been done before. Most of the models on climate change impacts on marine ecosystems, even on the IPCC, only use one single model. This is the first one that uses 9 different models. Now, the conclusions and the take-home messages is first that by 2100, under the high emission scenario declines, I had one before, didn't I? There you are. Projections of exploitable fish biomass showing more than 10% declines, particularly under high emissions by 2050 for most regions, or for many regions. By 2100, under the high emission scenario, declines that worsen to over 30% in many countries and territories. But in contrast, on the low emission scenario, changes stabilize to changes of less than 10% across 178 countries and territories. This is the good message of it, that we really have an opportunity under the low emission scenarios to avert many of these risks. Now, this demonstrates the benefits of climate migration, but also very important for some of us that work on adaptation, that effective fisheries management is the best adaptation measure. If you are able to respond quickly to what is happening in the ocean with management measures, this is the best solution. Now, there's a number of uncertainties, of course, in all these modeling approaches. First, of course, not mentioned there, this is a modeling of biomass, not of catches, but of biomass. So equivalently, if you have, let's use a banking equivalent, is the capital that you have in your bank. It's not what you extract, of the interest that capital gives you. It's just the biomass, so that capital. Now, one important uncertainty is that there are some areas that we see increases in biomass as a result of climate change, but those tend to have a lower model confidence compared to the ones that show significant decreases. So the models, depending on how the parameterization of the models, you might actually not have the same answer. Primary production is the most important driver of fish production, and it is uncertain, particularly in those areas where we see an increase in biomass, so the Arctic regions, for example. And of course, these models do not account for fishing activity. It's the baseline. This is what the productive capacity of the ocean, rather than what we do as a result of that. And I think that's all that I wanted to mention. There's, of course, QR codes here that if you click it, you'll have access to the report. And of course, for every country of the world, there is a map. For every country of the world, there are squiggly lines of projections, and there are tables with numbers as well, and standard deviation of those numbers, which I think that will be extremely useful for adaptation. And because I'm using adaptation as my last word, I just want to mention that WorldFish, FAO, and a number of others that you can see there provided this year a report on how to integrate blue foods into national climate strategies, and the results of the models that I've presented are absolutely essential to make those adaptations count and to frame them properly in the NDCs in 2025. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for that really enlightening and inspiring presentation to kick us off this morning. Quite a lot of what he said really strongly resonated with me. particularly I think towards the end when he said fisheries management is the best strategy for adaptation. But also I think it's also equally the best strategy for mitigation as well, I would like to think, because the more fish we have, the more CO2 we can sink into the ocean, and therefore the opportunity for both mitigation and adaptation is there for us. And I think this is really critical in terms of bringing the issue to the forefront of the discussions that we're having in this platform, but also to create space for dialogue like these to inspire each other and to find solutions together for a better future for all. And to help us further have a deeper dialogue and conversation today, we have a lineup of excellent speakers. We have Thijs Schut, if you may come and join us. Thijs Schut is a scientist with World Fish, and we have Monique Barreto Galvao, who's the Vice President for Fish Forever program with RARE in Brazil. Excellent. And we have with us Ariane Steinmüller, who's the Outreach and Engagement Director with Aura. And we have Amrika Singh as well, who's the Program Manager at CARICOM Secretariat. I was going to first invite perhaps Ariane, which is really key here is we've been talking about a lot about we know now we've established about the impact of climate change on fisheries, and we also probably know the impact of that on profitability and how that varies from different regions, of course. And just to make a point here, in a similar modeling exercise, I recall reading a paper by William Chang from UBC, who looked at, is there a divergence in profitability as a result of climate change in fisheries in particular between high-income countries and low-income countries? And it was really clear that the low-income countries, if you look at their projections for profitability, it just is a downward slope. While for the high-income countries, at worst, it plateaus, right? So this is also, as much as it is about the impact on the ecology or nature, but it's also a quest for justice as well, right? But to realize the shift that's required and to build a resilient aquatic food system, be it in fisheries or aquaculture, one of the critical elements that's required is on finance. And Ariane, if I may kindly ask you to enlighten us in terms of what sort of innovations are out there when it comes to climate finance, particularly related to aquatic food systems, be it in fisheries or aquaculture. Ariane, please.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for this amazing panel, and thank you, Manuel, for sharing the data, which is really useful to really make decisions. When you have better data, you can make better decisions. Aura is an alliance with more than 100 members. Some of the members are also here on this panel and in the audience. And really our core mission is to ensure that we're scaling innovative financial and insurance solution, as you mentioned. So we're 5 years old. In the past 5 years, we were able to scale about 60 different products, locally led solutions around finance and insurance products mainly. And with that, we were able to activate around 50 million so far into the sector. And what was really innovative and what we found most interesting in this space is that there is locally led solutions already there, which just need a little bit of technical assistance. So we also launched a leadership program called ORIC, Ocean Risk Innovation Challenge. And what we found is that with some of these leaders, they have investable projects. They just, really need still very basic leadership training, financial training, financial literacy. And so with that, we really help them to scale some of their solutions and then help them to move to the next level where what we call the missing middle, where some of these products then are ready for a smaller scale financial investment, but also then where grant funding can help them to get to the next level. So we also have been scaling, as I said, around 60 products globally, and some of the solutions also was in collaboration with RARE and some of our insurance partners, where we unlocked about like what is the role of insurance. That could be health insurance, life insurance for small-scale fishers, but also parametric insurance. And the parametric insurance have been proven to be really effective because it really supports fishers, especially, to be able to react immediately after a certain sort of natural disaster. And with that, well, sort of RARE helped us to scale that with some of the financial support we got through the UK to showcase that in Indonesia and the Philippines. We now, with the MAR Fund, are able to scale that also globally in other regions as well. So these are some of the examples. We are also financing in Africa with Abelobi, a tool around financial resilience and financial inclusion in terms of sort of data apps and recording fish biomass and really also supporting women making decisions when they are really the ones, the workforce basically also in the distribution of the small-scale fisheries business as well.
Thank you very much, Ariane. I think it's really important that, the one you mentioned about, I was so pleased to hear the use of the term financial inclusion. I think looking at beyond the demand and supply of money, I think looking at the whole financial ecosystem is really important. Because I think one of the key factors for financial exclusion is the fact that there aren't suitable, affordable, and usable financial products and services out there. But you mentioned you've got 60 products, Ariana. If you just give us two ends of the spectrum of these 60 products, but if you can elaborate a bit more about the parametric insurance as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, also given that RARE's on the panel, more than happy for you to elaborate further on this. But the parametric insurance basically is a service. It's an insurance for the small-scale fishers, as I said, if a natural disaster hits and they can't go out fishing within a certain amount of days, and we have found it can be really quite quickly after 1 or 2 days, they get reimbursed for the loss of catch, basically. And that helps them to have, as we mentioned before, to have financial stability so that next time they go out, they don't have to overfish again. So it really helps them with, I think what you also mentioned, Manuel, with the fisheries management, which is stable and which is predictable and where they are able to, therefore, also in terms of financial sustainability and resilience, sort of plan ahead. So that has been really useful. In terms of other products we are scaling, it really depends on the needs. And it's not only small-scale fisheries related, but some of the tools, as I mentioned, some of the apps, which also some of our members have been scaling across the region now. But really, it's also about finding a way where we are able to also define the standardization of what means sort of investment into the blue economy. So another example is to establish and now pilot what it looks like if you are building a blue carbon market, and what does that mean in terms of standards. So what are the principles in terms of inclusion and so on and so forth. So with partners, we have been also launching the high quality blue carbon principles and guidelines, and now have been actually in Cali launching the practitioner's guide, so helping really project developers to understand where are sort of what is my pathway so that I can really meet these standards and help to scale these also.
Brilliant.
As well.
Thank you very much, Monique. And maybe naturally we'll go to Ariana then. Now, one of the most critical constraints or systemic constraints that inhibits scaling locally led adaptation is often talked about, which is lack of access to finance. So how do these kind of innovations in financial inclusion or enhancing access to finance help deliver locally led adaptation from your experience, Ariana? Monique, sorry.
Ariane is my colleague. It's
Yes,
fine.
please.
It's a good question because, like in give a lens in Brazil, for instance, our challenge is not really to develop the policy or sometimes to provide access, is to really implement. So what you brought about the insurance, our policy has the insurance, and what we need to work is on the behavior in terms of when they can access this and how they can access. Sometimes the access of this type of insurance in Brazil, instead of the small scale fisher access, there is a lot of fraud. How we avoid this and how we implement this in practice. So we have been working in Brazil in the Amazon coast. So basically, in the Brazil has 10% of the mangrove of the world. And if you zoom in, welcome to COP next year, by the way, in Pará state, which is one of the 3 states that cover 80% of the Brazil, we have amazing legal framework, but it's lack of action in the ground. Sometimes the management plans, for instance, they don't have the management plans implemented, and take 20 years to really, from the legal framework, the policy, to really access this in the ground. So this is what we have been working with communities, not only with communities, but with different stakeholders, because everyone has a role to play. So the community has a role to play. The mayor of the municipality has a role to play. We have a network of coastal leaders that with the mayors, and they understand their role and responsibility in the management plans. We work with women in an amazing network named Mothers of Mangrove, MOM, the acronym, and they have a role as a woman with financial literacy and financial inclusion and entrepreneurship, and also with the youth. So it's to mobilize different stakeholders to bring together into action and really have an actionable management plan beyond, so there is a huge gap between the policy and the mechanism and really implementing the ground. So this is what we have been working, mobilize these stakeholders for action.
Thank you very much, Monique. That's really helpful. And now maybe if we go to CARICOM, to the Caribbean, now, again, America is saying, if you can share with us some of the innovative approach in terms of ocean-related climate finance issues that you've been working on, but also which ones are scalable or promising, and which ones are facing challenges, and how we can overcome them, America. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
first of all, for the opportunity to share the experiences of the Caribbean community. Unfortunately, my colleagues took some of the points, but what I would share with respect to CARICOM, it's a grouping of small island developing states, fully dependent on our coastal. Almost 70% of our populations at some point depend for their livelihoods on coastal resources. It's a very complex environment because in addition to fisheries and food security, we also have a lot of our member states are dependent on tourism. So tourism, housing, fisheries in a small space. So it does require a lot of management. The other issue is that climate change, I know we're speaking about local adaptation, but in a small island setting, climate change and the impact of climate change is national. So for example, Hurricane Beryl, which we just had in July of this year, was a historic, we're finding that more often. Every hurricane season, we have a historic hurricane now in the region. Beryl was the first to develop it to Category 5 in June in the region, and we had destruction in about 8 of our associate members, with Barbados and St. Lucia, the fisheries industry being impacted significantly. So in terms of innovation and adaptation, what we have in the past when it comes specifically to adaptation, we have a number of good practices. We've had examples of coastal ecosystem restoration. We've had, coral transplanting, trying to, regrow our coral reefs, which have been damaged for various reasons. We've had examples of the policy type things that FAO has been very supportive in, the fisheries code of conduct. We've had examples where fishing communities have tried to localize the code of conduct so that, for a particular community. CARICOM has also been at the forefront of the parametric insurance movement. We have a Caribbean community, CRIF, it's called the CRIF, so the insurance facility for the region. And one of the newest products we have is one dedicated almost exclusively to the fishing industry because of how important it is to us. And throughout it all, the fishing community is actually at the forefront of our adaptation response because very often they are involved in research that the scientists do in the fishing, in the fisheries or the marine environment. They're also involved in the response because very often they're the first on hand to help other islands. So in terms of scaling, one of the critical things that is important for us, the Caribbean community, within the framework of the UNFCCC, is the whole issue of adaptation finance, the issue of learning, the Nairobi Work Program, for those of you who are familiar, and being able to share experience amongst ourselves, but not just ourselves, with our Latin American colleagues, as well as with the other SIDS, and having adaptation finance that is equitable and scalable and predictable that will allow us to transfer and escalate some of these good practices that we have done. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much. You did indeed. Just one point of clarification. So when we have insurance policies or products and services, do they also cater for small-scale operators? Or
well,
they do?
oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, all our operators are small scale.
Okay.
But the difference with us is that, okay. So for example, let me give you the case of Barbados.
Yeah.
When we had Hurricane Beryl, you don't secure your fishing equipment in your community. It's almost all secured in national facilities. So for a small island setting, very often, even though the response or the intervention may be local, there has to be a national element. So for example, grants or subventions have to be issued to help the community get back on its feet, and that will be done at a national level. So there's that small, right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the reason why I asked that question is I'm not going to name the country, which is a coastal state, by the way. And in an engagement with that country, the officials in the country, we were looking at those kind of access to social services, such as insurance and what have you. And for me, the main surprise was the institutional bias, which is the labor law of that country doesn't recognize fishing or fishing as a vocation, right? So you are legally excluded. If you're a farmer, you're a business owner, you're a teacher, whatever, you have all those categories in terms of vocations and professions, but fishing per se is not recognized in the labor law of the country. So institutionally, essentially, you're excluded. So those kind of a number of other institutional barriers that need to be eliminated as well in order to enhance access to climate finance. But
Sorry.
Monique.
Yeah, America.
Amrika,
Sorry.
sorry,
No
it's early
problem.
morning. I haven't had my coffee yet, so please, Amrika.
No, just an additional
Yeah.
point on that.
Yeah.
So parametric insurance, of course, is very expensive for us in the region. So for that as well, we do have to approach it nationally, where the insurance will be purchased by the government. And then, then the communities will benefit from the payout. Yeah.
Brilliant. Marika, thank you very much. Now, let's bring it down to subnational level with ties. Now, I think it's really useful to talk about the need for climate finance and having an equitable and sustainable financial architecture, right, to fill the finance gap that we have. But however, how do we make sure that money reaches those who need it most, those who are farthest behind, right? How do we cater for those who need it most? And to help us answer that question, Thais, if you can share your insights from Timor-Leste and elsewhere, either in terms of how it could be also from your perspective in terms of how that could be delivered at a local level.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Oh,
yeah, I can hear you.
this is better. Thank you, Essam, and thank you also for the panelists for your inspiring talks. I really appreciate the people-centered approaches being represented here. I'm based in Timor-Leste, and I work in communities, coastal communities in Timor-Leste. And what I would like to stress is that listening to the stories here is that context really matters, right? So we talk about scalable solutions, but we also need to be aware of that these contexts are so vastly different. So, for example, Monique talks about a very strong legal framework. In Timor-Leste, which is quite a new state, it became independent in 2002. These legal frameworks are yet to be established, or if they are established, they are yet to be fully implemented and further developed. Similarly with, for example, insurance or banking systems. In the places that we work, there is no access to financial institutions, let alone that there is financial literacy. So how do you get people on board with locally led adaptation? How can you support these people? And I think this is where, well, first of all, reports like the work presented by Mr. Barange, it really motivates, it gives urgency to get out there, right? To see that the situation is actually quite dramatic. And that gives the fuel to sort of get beyond big slogans of scalability or finance for justice, but really like how are we going to do this on a local level? And that basically means that you need to get out there and talk to people. And I think it's true that a lot of local communities are already busy with adapting to local, to new climatic conditions. So in our experience, it is really, well, it really works well to go to the communities and ask, like, what are your assets? What are your strengths? Where do you build your livelihoods on? What are your climate issues? What are the stressors? And what kind of visions do you have for the future? Now, the next step, of course, is then to develop together with the communities, giving them the voice and the capacity, like, okay, what are we going to do? And here, again, science comes in. Not only to sort of check, like, okay, whether it fits the climate projections, but also to think about what could be. So communities are really capable of indicating, like, these are the issues, but sometimes it's difficult to think about what kind of things you could do. And so what we do as World Fish is to really think about scalable solutions, like bundles of activities that we can implement. Basically, they are thought of and designed with the community. And then, so to have these bundles and to be able to flexibly implement them in the communities that we work with.
Yeah. Thank you very much. As I was listening to the conversation, I was just going to ask this question. Then I will open the floor for a Q&A. But meanwhile, so there's a lot of talk happening now as we speak, right? In the negotiation rooms, and one of them is, of course, financing. But if we were to bypass that, how do we harness other financing avenues, whether it's harnessing the market forces or other means, to fill the critical finance gap that we face in realizing the climate action that we want to see? Anyone want to take that question? Yeah.
I can start if you want.
Sure.
Yeah? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So as I mentioned, Aura is an alliance, and some of our members are really, or the core of of our member alliance is really to have the exchange between different sectors. So to bring in the private sector, the banking sector, insurance sector, but also the science. And so based on the data which Manuel presented this morning, we also have been launching in Cali what we call the Ocean Coastal Risk Index. And with that, it's also underlining that 40% of the population is really living in coastal communities, but a lot of also the assets are based in coastal communities. And so with the Coastal Risk Index, we now have modeled not only the physical risk of flooding, but also social and economic risk. And we know that these assets are at stake, and we have a number, and that comes back to the question, what is needed here? So it's approximately 400 billion annually, which are at stake in assets in coastal communities, and 14 million more people might be at risk annually also for flooding incidents. So that's something which helps then also the private sector, coming to your question, to better make decisions on how to invest in nature-based solutions or ocean-based solutions in the future to prevent the threat. Another initiative we also have been elaborating is really how do we get the shift needed in helping, for example, the banking sector, but also the insurance sector to change the investment they're making and shifting that also into the blue economy, a sustainable and regenerative blue economy, I want to add. And so under the framework of what we call Back Blue, and the Deutsche Bank, who's actually here in the panel as well, in the audience, is one of the first signatories, and really where the banking sector is now thinking about how do we switch our investment portfolio into the more sustainable and regenerative blue economy. Yeah. And so that is something we're really quite excited about, to work with our members, again, from the private sector, and get them more engaged, get them more also understandable about what is the ocean risk with data, but also with the exchange we're facilitating to bring in and also the local community voices and really help with the pipeline and what we have been building together with our members to showcase there are investable solutions. Now you have to mobilize the finance and come in, and that's something we're really focused on in the next 6 months.
Sure. Thank you very much. Okay, you both tempted to add to that, please.
Yeah, if I may add, 6 years ago, we thought in solutions like in a room like this, us thinking for the community, and what we shift completely, and what you're saying is that we work with local associations to really provide them knowledge and access for change. So sometimes we think that we know the solution, but they know the solution better than us. So 2 examples about the period of non-fishing season. It's a government rule, but then if you empower the community to really understand the flow and provide access, more fishers has access to this type of service from the government. As well, build projects, focus on value chain, aligning with conservation. So crab facility, oysters, banks protection, and really think not only in the keep the forest green, but also the bank account not red. So it's really important to have this balance of conservation, generation income, and food security, not only one or the other, but both together. Precisely. And bring the community together to the solution, not us thinking for them.
Precisely. Thank you very much. And I presume Tis is going to amplify that message going.
Yes. There's a lot of stuff going on in my head, so I hope to be able to get some structure there. But in general, what we notice is that we talk about small-scale fisheries in Timor-Leste, and I think in many of the places, well, in the Caribbean. But the financing doesn't match the skill of the small-scale fisheries. So that is one of the issues. And I think if we think through finance, through locally led adaptation, it also means that we change the financing, we give ownership, or at least a part of the ownership of funding to the communities that need to do the adaptation. So we often forget that who's doing the adaptation? Well, it's the people out there, right? So they need to have an ability to say, like, this is what we want to do, and this is what we can do. And this whole idea of vision, the prioritizing by local communities, but also matching that with local capacities is often missing when we talk about large-scale financing or scalable finance solutions. And so often when we talk about communities, it's like, okay, we have this finance thing and communities need to work with that. But it might be actually good to think it the other way around. So we have a community, and how can we match the financing situation to the community? And noting that if I talk about the community, it's not a unified set. There's many, many different people in that with competing interests, and there's always winners and losers. So that's the caveat, but this is the kind of thing that we need to change our thinking, and I appreciate what Monique is saying, that this shift is already noticeable, but I think that locally led adaptation, and the way it structures our approaches really can also help with our approaches to finance.
Excellent. I don't think we can disagree with that. I think it's really, really critical, isn't it? I think there is a design aspect which is, at a macro level that happens, that consumes most of our time. But in the end of the day, it's all about, reaching those who are farthest behind and who gets to inform, because in the end of the day, financial inclusion is about suitability and usability of whatever financial products and services that we have as well. So I think having a better understanding of what's needed at the ground is really critical, and I think those two need to meet somewhere. Now, let me open. We still have about 10 minutes. If I may, if anyone has any question, raise your hand, introduce yourselves. And that makes me realize that at the beginning, I did not introduce myself. My name is Issam Yassin Mohammed. I'm the Director General of World Fish. It was either an oversight or I thought everybody knows me, which is not true. So please, any questions? Yes.
Thank you. Very informative and inspiring presentations. I just wanted to ask Tej that you mentioned these winners and losers in this coastal community resilience development. And we often see the case where, for instance, elderly fishermen looking at fish catch for this year, next year, but not looking at 5 years or 10 years. So when we discuss this climate change adaptations, resilience, risk management, obviously people have a different time scale looking at the solution and the impact. And the question arises how we can really forge the consensus among the stakeholders with the different interests and having a different time scale. And I just wonder how you approach these issues. Thank you. My name is Masanori Kobayashi from Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Tokyo, Japan.
Thank you so much for your question, and I think you're absolutely right. There's different time scales, there's different interests, there's people with different gear types that have different reasons to support locally implemented protection areas and so forth. Look, if we talk about locally led adaptation, there's often, and talking about communities, a sort of romanticized idea comes up, right? And we need to be very clear about that. So that's why I say about this winners and losers. Consensus, yes, we can build consensus, but realistically, there's always people that are being excluded. And I think that is problematic, but part of life, basically. But we shouldn't put it aside. We should acknowledge it and continue to work on that. And be aware of the groups that are being excluded and make that part of the intervention for the next cycle or whatsoever. So it's more about acknowledging and then taking that into your program design, then actually solving these inequalities. Because at the end of the day, the organization I work with, World Fish, but I think also Rare, Aura, and Adicom. We are just one part of what's going on, right? Village life is a continuous thing, and we are sort of coming in, talking, discussing, supporting, but at some point we also leave, and life goes on, and we need to be aware of that. So I'm not sure whether we can actually solve these kind of issues, but more like including them in our thinking and approaches.
Thank you very much, Thijs. Okay, please, Mark and Michelle.
Hi, my name is Mark Essler. I'm a partner with Carney, a global management consulting firm. So we usually work with the big corporations. My question maybe to you two, who are Monique and Thijs, who are at the forefront. I'm looking for like an 80-20 rule. What are the 5 or 3 or 2 things that will yield fast results and in the time frame that is possible? What are the things that we should be looking at to invest early to have long-term good consequences?
Thank you very much, Mark. Can we take one more question, if you don't mind? Michelle?
Hi, thank you. My name is Michelle Tichelaar. I'm also at Rollfish. I was thinking about America's comment about the hurricane, and Manuel's projections that he presented doesn't include such kind of destructive events. It's really ocean modeling based. So already the numbers you present, Manuel, are quite high. And as a scientist, I'm like, oh yeah, lines make sense. But if you really internalize these numbers, it's huge losses. And on top of that, we have destructive events like hurricanes. And I was just wondering, America, but other panelists as well, what do those numbers mean for you? And how does that inform the way you act and think for the future?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, okay, Manuel as well is very tempted. So can someone pass the microphone to Manuel, and then I'll ask the panelists as well to respond to Michelle's and Mark's point, please. Thank you.
Yes, I wanted to comment on that, but I think that is, there's 2 things that are separate, and we are talking about them at the same time, but they need to be separated. The first one is when we see impacts of climate change in terms of global biomass and what have you, what we are sending the signal is we need to manage, right? Management is needed because in many of these places, there are no formal science-based management systems. And whatever the drop is, you need a management system that is responding to that drop. Okay? And that is something that operates mostly at national level. And that the stronger message that I want to give is that management is the best adaptation. And that is one signal, one message. The other is the other adaptations. The adaptations are below national level. And those have to be very specific, and you are absolutely right that things like extreme events have to be handled in that context of being exacerbated or increased by climate change. But the adaptations, there's no fisheries management manager, for example, that will actually reduce quotas or increase quotas on the basis of the models that I've presented results for, because they are subject to a lot of uncertainties. The message is just manage, whatever you do your bit and manage. But then the adaptations have to be, in our view, have to be 3 types. And the one is sort of institutional and management adaptation. Do you have the institutions capable of coping with what's happening? Do you have the management systems that are coping? The second adaptation level is the livelihoods, and that is very much of what was being talked in the panel. Do you have measures to adapt at livelihood level, so diversifying livelihoods, providing alternatives, and so on? And the third level, which again has been mentioned here, is the risk management for resilience. Things like insurance, that could be community insurance, could be individual insurance, assets insurance, that sort of thing. And those 3 individual adaptation options are independent of what the models tell you of increases or decreases, right? You can just move ahead on the basis of the fact that changes are going to happen. So you have these 3. So I think that separating those 2, the management side at national level and the adaptations more at local level, is quite important.
Sure. Thank you very much, Manuel. And maybe quickly, if I can ask any one of you to respond to Mark's point, I think which is also equally important, is about, you're trying to send a sense of urgency in terms of, where do we invest for best return from a resilience point of view, right? Anyone, please, Monique.
Me, that I'm in these spaces from global to local, I get a local frustration in terms of, getting decision to action. And one thing which is hard to measure is to invest in trust. Invest in trust in order to make the different stakeholders to work together. right? How we make the community trust in the government and the government trust in the community, you know, and this takes time.
Yeah.
This is not something that one project, 1 year is going to solve the problem like this. This takes the time. So have capital to invest from the, you know, early stages, and then when the thing is going, the governance is working, and then you want to invest in a business or a beer economy, you know, there is different stages. And what we need to do is to maybe have a different type of capital for different type of needs. And sometimes they want just the thing, you know, 5-year project, let's solve this problem. It's not like this. We need to work in trust.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think maybe in the interest of time, and the organizers, I guess, they're going to tell us to evacuate the room soon, in 3 minutes, I've been told. But listen, folks, you know, the conversation only starts here, but it doesn't end here, right? I think the most important thing is to keep these conversations alive. Let's keep this, you know, kind of dialogue going. Let's continue to inspire each other. For me, my takeaways are, the science has never been clearer, right? Science is really clear in terms of the impact of climate change on oceans and aquatic systems and aquatic food systems and the people who depend on them. There is no dispute about that. The sense of urgency, we've seen it, right? And therefore, to bring back Ty's point as well in terms of, you know, the need to empower communities and be the owners of their own destiny through local-led adaptation, but to realize that we need sustainable financing, right? We need accessible, equitable, usable, suitable. I heard another adjective, which is predictable. You know, all these, suitable financing, financial products and services are really critical, and making sure they cater for the needs of those local communities who we're talking about. The other one is, I think there is also a need to eliminate institutional bias that can act as barriers in enabling communities to access these finances. But one thing that really struck me that never came up is the public financing as well, right? And people always say, oh, billions of money, that's a bit too much. No, it's not. You know, and yesterday I made the same point. If you look at subsidies that go into fisheries or fishing subsidies, they amount to tens of billions of dollars every year. We're talking about something around $30 to $40 billion a year, right? So how do we repurpose these subsidies, right, and use them in a way that they support locally led adaptation? So let's harness all those opportunities, whether through the private initiatives or multilateral financial institutions or public finance or a blend approach of sort. I think whichever way, let's make sure that delivers benefit to those who need them most. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving them a round of applause to my panelists.